So one of the things that struck me in listening to the three presentations was, Ida, you were sort of describing a universe of practice that has yet to be codified, that you're developing a rubric that actually is starting to pick out the features of this field, such that they might be applied in other places. In a sense, it's a methodology that's emerging. And at the other end of the extreme, we have design thinking and co-creation that are already sort of codified. They're methodologies that have become, at least on your account, so codified that they're commodified and have lost whatever sort of magic dust they may once have had. So I wonder, and this is really for all three of you, if you think there is if it's possible for a methodology to have a sort of a sweet spot in stasis, can it find its right place, or are these things always in motion and always sort of coming in and out of fashion and use because they don't stay the same?
I mean, my first instinct is that they're coming in and out of use, and that they're usually responding to a particular need around a particular time. So my example of funerals, it's like, funeral directors 100 years ago were doing their best and earnestly trying to provide a service, and now that we're 100 years into the practice, it's no longer relevant. And so I think, to an extent, these things are always in motion. But I think the real danger is in creating systems or rubrics divorced of the skilled practitioners we need to apply them. And I think that has come up really strongly in Lorena and Samira's work, what that looks like when you have a set of principles but not an intimacy with the principles or the application. When I think about design in a more material sense, like built environment or graphic design, there's a real intimacy with the materials. And I think we're forgetting that the intimacy of the materials we need here is very human. And so it's easy to convince ourselves that we have it when we don't. Like, what's the measure there?
It's interesting. So you're describing things that are sort of described as human-centered when divorced from skilled practitioners actually lose their humanity. They actually are sort of floating and theoretical and are not anchored any longer. What's your take, Lorena?
I was going to mention something about scale. I think we talked about this. When methods go in a big, massive scale, that is when sometimes it loses part of its magic. And I do believe design is magic as well. But when in the context of business, what you want is profit. And you are striving for a competitive advantage, and you don't want others to have that. At least that's my experience in business. So there, in that instance, methods sort of build upon each other. So I think that's when, in this case, I argue design thinking is losing its power because everyone's using it. And then now there's a bunch of other brands of design thinking, which that would be interesting to see.
It's so interesting because it's sort of an account in which universal access doesn't seem possible. Like if something becomes so universal, which you might think abstractly is a good thing, on your account it actually loses its heft. It loses its potency because it's so commodified. Is that accurate?
Right.
What's your take, Samira?
I would say that they're completely diluted at scale, and it depends on who's controlling the conversation. So design thinking right now for us is like North Korean posters. They're everywhere, and we just like...
That's what we meant to do.
We're absorbing it like, there is no other way to look at it. And that's why we need to get out of it and critique it and then see, is it still making sense? Does it still make sense to apply it to all the contexts that we ever encounter, or do we need to look at it the way Ida is looking at it and just focusing on her practice?
Is part of this about language? I mean, there's formal commodification in terms of toolkits and things being disseminated and sent out and packaged and all the rest of it. But just the fact that you had that incredible slide of like 1,000 articles that mentioned design thinking. Just the language around it, there's one way to describe it, that's a shorthand, that there's a loss of specificity about what's intended.
Yes, of course, definitely. And there is, well, just to, like in Spanish, there's no design thinking. in Spanish. That's just design thinking.
Really?
Yeah, you don't. No, you couldn't do that. So yeah, with the language you can just play, and it just creeps in to a lot of things. I think maybe the deli in a couple of years will be design thinking its way into, bagels and donuts. I don't know. That'd be fun to see. Yeah, I think that.
Ida, did you have some?
I mean, the underpinnings of my project is the search for a lexicon, and I think the purpose of that lexicon is so that people who are already doing the work that I'm interested in interesting ways can converse with each other. Because right now they don't necessarily have a method of comparing their practices unless, they're really going through their stuff together. I mean, something I share certainly with Barbara, who runs experiences that she calls mesas. It's like, you bristle when somebody calls it a workshop, just as I bristle when somebody calls my thing a party. It changes the expectations, and so I think that, yeah, there is a real specificity with language, but my concern is more for the practitioners. I guess this goes back to scale a little bit. When you make it big enough that anybody can be a practitioner with design thinking, then what are you actually offering anybody anymore?
Right, and there's a difference between a lexicon and a methodology. Let's take some questions. Katie?
So thank you for having me. I really appreciate all your talks together. Actually worked really well. One theme is the facilitator and how important the facilitator is. And you talked about early on wanting to be able to empower people to have their own, design their own. Do you still feel that way? Is it possible, knowing the value of a facilitator?
I mean, I think the conclusion I've come to is that there are pieces of this that can be considered a folk practice or a craft, and anybody can practice a craft. But the tricky thing with these experiences is that because the risk needs to be real, the participants need to be able to really kind of lose control or subject themselves to it. So you need somebody who's kind of holding the space. And that position, when you're asking people to confront risk, is a huge responsibility to take on. And so I think that it's not for everybody, and I think that I still am in the position where I'd like to be inspiring other people to do it because I like high-touch experiences. I don't, scaling is tricky. I can't make a bigger experience and have it still work, so then what? Because I see this doing cool stuff for people, I don't want to have to go to more shitty funerals, right? So, how do we shift the culture, right?
Okay, so I'm Barbara. I run these things called Mesa, and I cringe when people call it workshops, but it's definitely the easy way to describe it. And it's funny because I also cringe at the word facilitator. So I'm there running this, and the reason is that I think facilitators bring the idea that you're there just helping other people solve it. Whereas I think I need to be having a real connection to what we are doing in order to make other people get to that connection. So at the end of the day, I feel 100% responsible for the result that we're doing instead of just helping people get there. And when when you showed the slide with risk and you had a heart image behind it, for me it says it all, because I really think the thing is here, the person who's running it, I would say it's way more like a magician than any other thing. You are, I think that's it. You have to be responsible. The person running it, it can't be just a medium. It has to be the person holding everything, because otherwise you would never allow for people to have that experience. Because part of it is just trusting that you are at risk, but then something else is controlling it, I feel. And sorry for the big introduction, but what I want to ask is, okay, so we know there is a lot of control. We know there has to be this kind of, because you walk into a magical circle and you know someone is taking care of it. But at the same time, it needs to allow for people to have their own experiences, and people come out very different. So how do you handle this? How much, can you control? And how much do you allow? Do you have parameters now that you know that will work? I think I'm just trying to get tips for my own work.
Well, it's great that you actually said magic circle, because that's one of the big concepts in my research. I don't know if you're familiar with that as a game design term. But I think it's a balance of kind of care. And I think about it, Alex, when you were speaking earlier, I thought about this issue of intention, right? Also of you in terms of business. Business intentions can be quite suspect. So if the intention is one of care, right? How can you create enough care that people can be in the space and continue to exist in the space and do something that's risky? while also respecting whatever that kind of like bigger element is that happens when a bunch of people come together and are actually like focused together. I don't know if I'm answering your question. You had such a beautiful long introduction. There's so many things I want to comment on that. So hey, I'm gonna hijack your question and ask, where is the heart in design thinking? I'm asking both of you. Neither of you want to answer that. Just tell me.
I think it's a really provocative question. So what you're describing, like Lorena particularly, is the human removed from a human-centered design process, right? Now, I think that my instinct is that it comes down to the discrete experience each and every time. You know, like the magic circle ought to be created anew every single time. And actually the methodology can't describe the process. It can't describe the happening, as it were. So
that's a great way to put it.
So how that happening is supported and activated anew each time, I think that's an interesting question, whether a methodology as currently disseminated can do that. Like, is there enough in a toolkit, is there enough in a guide to co-creation to spark that fresh activation? I don't know.
I mean, I think we've decided that the answer is no. And I think that's something that all of us kind of agree on. Yeah, like, you know, if you haven't kind of been through it to some extent, then there's no way for you to like see it when it's happening or know how to nurture it.
So that's an interesting opportunity, I think. Like, you know, what might be the thing that's missing? Like, can we imagine a co-creation methodology that, or a design thinking, or titled something different, a methodology that might be broadly shared, that does have that quality that's currently absent? Like, do we even think that that's possible?
I think there shouldn't be a methodology at all, because the moment we put it into a methodology, it's restricted and people want to use it. It's a step-by-step process. So someone who's not familiar with the idea of that there is so much more to it, a toolkit becomes, this is what I do first and then this is what I do. But if there is a designer or a facilitator helping in, saying that, no, this is just a basic outline, we can do so much more, which is, again, like, it's lost because it's been put into a methodology. So I don't think methodology is something that we need to get rid of.
So it's interesting because it's an account in which to properly democratize and share the embedded methods and tools actually requires like a deeper investment from external helpers. It's actually not as empowering as we may think it is. Right? We actually have to sort of return power to practitioners, even if that means outsiders in a community coming in. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's, I would agree, certainly. And I think the thing that's been tricky with my work is I'm looking at people who I think are excellent designers who might not be considered designers because there's no kind of professionalized field for what they're doing. So I'm running the risk of kind of, what's the term? I forget what it is. It's not have your cake or eat it too. But it's like, eating the goose that laid the golden egg. That's the trap I'm walking into. You know, like if something's working, like why point? If you point to it too much, then it's going to go away. Anyway.
We have time for more questions. Please.
Yeah, so we've been talking. Hi. So I'm Yasmina Layat, and I'm a new media artist experience designer. I think it's really quite fascinating, the themes of this distillation through whether it's commodification or this us evolving into the more comfortable things. I'm curious what you brought up something actually, like Samira, that I haven't thought about before, which is you were proposing that some of the pitfalls to the methodology is the idea that the assumption that a community is homogenous. So I'm curious how you are thinking of addressing, or what are you putting forth as a proposal that you can actually embrace somehow the biases of a community and how this can be part of this process.
So, well, I think that a community is always solving problems on its own. It doesn't need a designer, and there is always some ulterior motive, right? Like some organization who's funding that project, and therefore designers go into that community to solve a specific problem. I mean, I'm sure the community has figured at least 10 different ways to solve that problem on their own. So instead of like taking from them and learning, probably like putting that into our practice, we go as designers saying that, let me solve your problem. And oh, you should be part of it because you're part of the problem, and then once we leave, you can take it forward. And I just don't think that's, like, I've done it enough now to know that's not the way to go. And I'm still trying to figure out how it should be done, probably. And I just know that going in as with a designer mindset is not going to do it.
Well, I don't think I need the microphone.
Yes, you do, for the simulcast.
Sorry. Andrea Codrington-Lipke. In really interesting presentations, thank you, and I wish we could hear more. But I'm wondering if the whole, in recent years, especially in the past 2 decades, there's been this kind of almost messianic idea that design can solve everything, can be involved in everything, that I find really problematic. And I just want to know from all of you, are there certain experiences, problem situations that design can't begin to address, and that designers actually, pardon to all the designers in the room, need to eat a little humble pie and realize that design thinking, co-design, however you want to slice it, isn't going to do it? I think looking at it as design critics is awesome, but there is an aspect that this messianic approach isn't actually helpful. Just a
I think in contexts where you're looking across difference, and so you might be looking at a group that is up to things that don't look familiar to you, as the outside designer, it might be very tempting to go into that group and make it look like something that looks like a solution that's familiar. And so I think that the risk that designers run is being terrible listeners. And I think that, that's when this kind of messianic approach where the Messiah is the speaker, right? The Messiah is not the listener. That's where I think designers can really do a lot of harm.
Other questions? You go first.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, I feel that we're going towards a direction here in the discussion where the designer, either has to be really important and be at the center of everything, or then completely taken outside of it. And I kind of have the feeling that, yes, designers are really important and would be, if they are, at that moment, they are seeing themselves as part of it just as much as everyone else. So I don't know, I'm not a designer in my formation as I'm a journalist, and now I think if you guys knew exactly what I do, you would say, oh, that's design, and sometimes would say design thinking, and I actually think of myself as a journalist. Because, it kind of doesn't matter where I'm coming from, I think, and I think that way, it's not design itself, but it's like one person that is there connected. And again, the heart for me is this representation, like you are fully connected to that thing and you are helping it move forward. And then I think there is an important part of being an external person. I don't think it has to be, it could be done by itself with a system. But at the same time, I don't know, I think we're also now kind of moving towards a direction that it's, you either need that person to be there and do everything, or then you can't even do it. And maybe that group of people, they can organize themselves and kind of come out with I don't know, think maybe I lost myself here in that comment. But it's just, I think for me, if every person, we kind of have to understand that there is a person, it's kind of the magician of the thing. But it only works if she is also completely connected to the thing. I don't think with the toolkit or without the toolkit, just one designer can't just go and it's not only that for me, it's my, it's not, it's just very interesting like that.
Just a quick question, Katie, and then we'll
Okay,
wrap
so
up in a second.
so I'm guilty of also being a journalist before and now a designer, so kind of swaying. But I'm saying one thing that maybe this is similar, is coming from a field where a few years ago it was very popular to believe that everybody wanted to be a community journalist, and they built a lot of businesses around that. And the reality is people don't have time to be a fucking journalist. It's a lot of hard work, and it's really hard to report on yourself, And I think there's lots of areas in our world. Therapists are great. They're outsiders that come in and have special skills to look at you and see things that you can't see about yourself and pull out your own inspiration. So in some ways I wish that, your three would mash up, because I think you could actually make a toolkit or something, a process, a methodology that you could then apply that has these three characteristics. Because I think that's what, I mean, and design thinking isn't exactly what IDEO practices. They practice human-centered design, but design thinking is sort of like the Bikram yoga. You know what I mean? It's the gateway drug to get people open and thinking. And it worked, right? You're now at school being a design researcher, right? Because you realized what you needed. So in some ways, but I agree with you. The problem is people think it's the methodology completely. It's not really a question, but yeah.
I'm going to offer one question just to close us down. I wonder if there's a shared quality of humility that each of you is reflecting on. There's a humility to recognize the limits of any one methodology, to recognize the limits of any one practice, to recognize the limits of particular traditions and the limits of our own comfort in engaging with things in new ways. And I wonder if that resonates with you guys as a sort of quality that each of us has to protect in some very intentional way as we choose or not to take on these approaches and apply them.
Yes, definitely. And I think even the humility and expectations, when someone's designing for you or when you're hiring a service, that's also part of the thing, right? Because it could be a transaction, or it could be a relationship, or it could be a dynamic. I think that's also when designers really want to overperform and want to be the success story, want to be the thing. And yeah, humility is definitely lacking, as well as listening, but we could work on that.
There's something oxymoronic in suggesting that we protect humility. So I just want to put that out there. And the reason I love design and love practicing as a designer is because it suggests service. You can't do design unless you're in service to someone or something. And so when it's at its best, it has to be humble, because it is contributing to something different and bigger and other than itself. So I think of humility as more of a falling open than a protecting.
I think it's been drilled into us as part of design discourse that you have to be a certain way to be able to design a certain way. And that's what we need to shed. If we just look at ourselves as problem solvers, then we're solving the problem for a certain reason. And that's it, that's all you need. You don't need all the codified formats and methodologies and everything to do that. And then humility is right there. Doesn't need anything else.
All right, fantastic. So much to think about. Thank you, all three of you. And Samira, thank you so much.